In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Well, hello and welcome to the actual Anarchy podcast, the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian and Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. This is going to be a fun one. We are doing The Outlaw King, or just Outlaw King, actually, is the title of it. It is a Netflix film, and this is episode 107 of the show. We do have a special guest that we will introduce on the Last Nighters portion of the show in just a moment. So let's say hello to Robert before we get into that.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
All right, that's a pretty solid contribution to the show thus far, Robert. I do
That's what I do.
That. On the last show,
I come in and I anchor the show. I'm the anchor, and you're the ship, you know?
Right, and we're steering this right into the rocks right now. But I do want to mention that on our previous show, I did say that I really appreciated your contributions to the show. I really enjoyed your work.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. I swear.
It's nice to hear that after all this time that I'm accepted and appreciated. I like it. Thank you, Daniel.
Just the way you are.
I appreciate you.
You were born this way.
Daniel, you do such a good job on the show. You produce it, you get on all these great guests, and you talk on the show too. It's great.
Right. And our last show was on Action Point, which I thought was a really interesting movie, though terrible. It had a lot of discussion points. Now, this movie, which we will get into in a moment, I think was far better, but also has a plethora of things to discuss.
Yeah, it's a little bit much more betterer. There's a better script. There's better acting. There's like actors that are like proper actors that you would recognize in other stuffs. And it's an interesting film. It's kind of, if you watch Braveheart, you'll know that William Wallace interacts with Robert the Bruce. And Robert the Bruce is kind of this reluctant Scottish king who doesn't want to get involved so much, kind of wants to go along to get along. But then in this film, he's had enough. And he's claiming that the people are crying out for freedom. And he's going to wage a war.
Nothing screams freedom like a war. So on that note, why don't we get into the Last Nighters portion of the show? And just to reiterate, the show notes and more for this will be at actualanarchy.com/107. And here we go to the Last Nighters portion of the show. Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters. We are talking about Outlaw King tonight on this 50th episode of The Last Nighters. You can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com. We do have a special guest tonight, and we already have about 25 or so minutes of pre-show content that is available for our Patreon supporters. And we also promised to do a little bit of overdrive at the end. So there's going to be lots of bonus stuff to talk about with our guest. And you can find that at lastnighters.com/Patreon. Ways to support the show, keep us going, keep the lights on, and all of that good stuff. Robert, we have the Anarcho-Viking.
We do.
Olaf.
Yeah,
he
buddy.
Is a Misesian, Hoppian, all-around good dude who originally hails from Sweden. So why we're talking about a Scottish movie with him, I don't really know. But it has a lot of themes that I think are really in his wheelhouse. So Olof the Anarcho-Viking, welcome to the show. Why don't you just give your little bio to the audience before we get into the description of the movie and into our further discussion?
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show. So I'm Olof. I'm from Sweden originally. Left Sweden 10 years ago. I left Sweden when I was probably 14 years ago. I lived in Italy for 4 years. So I speak both Italian and Swedish fluently, and I do speak some English too. So
thank you. That'll help with our audience, I think.
Yeah. Went, moved to New York. Went to college in New York. I have a bachelor's in mathematics and statistics from Columbia University, and I was pretty left leaning, I would say, most of my life until about, but I guess my instincts have really always been, I had many libertarian instincts. It's just libertarianism was never on the radar screen. It just didn't exist. So you either, you fit into the sort of left liberal camp or the more slightly moderately conservative camp, and those were really the only options. So I fell into the left-leaning camps because I was very much against war. And U.S. intervention in foreign countries, and so I got introduced to Ron Paul, and I liked the guy. I had sympathies for him because of his stance on the warfare state. But I just couldn't let that universal health care go. How you're just gonna leave people to die on the streets? That's what you guys want. People who promote free market in healthcare, those people, they're just lunatics and monsters. So it took a while. It's not something that happened overnight, but it really did help a lot by being introduced to it. And through Ron Paul, I heard about the Mises Institute, and I got more and more interested and learned some more Austrian economics. And once you get down that path, there's really nothing going back. It just takes over your way of thinking, and you become immersed in this new way of looking at the world. So, I mean, on that's really it very, very much progression towards where I'm at today. Today, I would probably, yes, I would consider myself to be a private property anarchist. But, I know that's, strategy matters, and you have to be, be somewhat pragmatic too. But, you never give in to give up on your principles. So that's pretty much where I'm at today. Yeah.
So Olaf, your story is very similar to ours. I mean, not with the international moves on our part, but with the left-leaning growing up and the sort of not seeing anything on the menu that is anti-state. Because when the state is providing you media and education, they're basically running the restaurant, albeit poorly, but they're not going to have anything that is off menu, not sticking to the script or anything. So you really have to find this kind of on your own. And that's one of the key reasons why I think that the Ron Paul election campaign was useful, even though it was using political means, which in a principled sense, I'm against. But he did use it as an educational platform. And there was a wave of people that got sort of that exposure to something that probably clicked for them, because Robert and I talked about this on our Action Point episode, but essentially, I think that a lot of people know something's not right, but a lot of it is due to the Orwellian doublespeak. Like they see the state committing violence, but they're calling it something else. And so there's this disconnect. And so people get really confused by that. But then when you finally get something, here's kind of what things really are, you kind of take that red pill, or you get those They Live glasses. And you can kind of see the zombies, or is that what they are in They Live? Are they zombies or like aliens or something? Anyway,
alien thing.
Anyway, not to get into yet another movie, which because we're here to talk about Outlaw King, and how we start off the show generally is with the Google descriptions. So why don't we get into that? Here we go. Outlaw King came out 2018, 2 hours and 17 minutes. This is a Netflix produced film, and kind of surprising because they have $120 million budget, which is pretty big budget for what you'd think of as like almost akin to a TV network, especially since they're losing so much money right now. I think Netflix is down 29% stock-wise over the course of the year, and I don't think they've turned a profit ever. But anyway, here is the description. After being crowned King of Scotland, legendary warrior Robert the Bruce is forced into exile by the English and leads a band of outlaws to help him reclaim the throne. That's the whole thing. 63% Rotten Tomatoes, 7 out of 10 on IMDb, and 60% Metacritic. However, 94% of the Google users like it. And I'm on board with the Google users on this one. I did enjoy this film. Your thoughts, Robert, and then we'll go to Olaf.
Well, not a whole lot to react to there. I mean, that's an accurate description of kind of what happens. It's a little more nuanced than that. And I don't think that Robert the Bruce is the, pure hero at all. I think he does some really shady stuff. And of course, on top of that, he's a king, or a self-styled king. And, he demands taxes from the lands that it's not clear whether he owns it and rents them out, or if people own it and he's just demanding tribute taxes from this place that he claims dominion over. Now, on the war front, he claims that, the people are demanding freedom. And he hangs out with, well, let's just say that he's nearby when William Wallace is killed, or, he sees a body part of him, and the crowd gets angry, and he gets the sense that the people are ripe for an uprising, even though it had just happened. There was an uprising previous to that, the battle that's detailed in Braveheart, and they lost. But he claims that, now it's time for the people to revolt and blah, blah, blah. And, if I'm on board with a battle for freedom, so long as all the people joining in the battle are voluntary and you don't hurt any innocent people. And luckily, he's from a time when there's not a whole lot of collateral damage chance. It's not like you're lobbing nukes or firebombing cities. They're meeting up at a field and they're hacking each other to pieces. So it's not like a random grenade's going to go off and blow off some kid's head. So in that sense, it's a more moral thing that he does. It's not clear, though, that everybody's there voluntarily. Like all the soldiers, it's like they all pledged their allegiance to this local lordling guy, and then they pledge their allegiance to him. And so they have a certain number of men that they can call upon to fight in the war. It's not clear exactly how coerced these people are. So I don't know. I'm not clear on the whole morality of it all, but at least it's more moral of a war than a modern war that's waged between two states. So I can get behind it a little bit more than that.
All right, that's interesting. What's your take so far on the Google description and just your general impression, and then any response to Robert's comments? Olaf.
Well, for me, it's very difficult to not have sympathy for Robert the Bruce in this movie. I think he is, given the narrative that they point up here, that they paint up between King Edward and his counterpart, I think that there's no question that Robert the Bruce is on the right side of this battle, of this conflict. And I do think there are some interesting things that distinguishes him and makes him more friendly towards freedom in my eyes. And one of them is that when he was incarnated as the king, illegally so according to the English, but in any case, he was anointed, appointed a king by the people that he supposedly ruled over. He said, I'm the king of the Scots. I'm not the king of the land. And in that to me can only mean one thing, that the land isn't mine to expropriate. It's the people that for their private use. I am the king of the people, meaning I am a judge. And that is, the least evil that a state can do if it just were, acting as the judge, which it never does. It always tends to expand itself. But that, I think, was just that statement that he made there made me view him more favorable, his character. And of course, I mean, they have the right to fight for their own freedom, for their own secessionist movement, and their own association that they want to create. And if they want to separate from the emperor, which is somehow how I view the English, the King Edward, then it's very hard for me not to sympathize with Robert the Bruce to a certain degree, and the side that he's on, obviously. And there are other things to say about this, but that is sort of my initial reaction in regards to the conscription of soldiers. And it's not clear. They don't really talk about this much. But you remember there's a moment in the movie when they're trying to take that young man and drag him away and the goddaughter of King Edward interferes and says, no, you don't do that with children. He wants men fighting, not children. That is a sign. That was at least a sign to me that there is some kind of conscription involved in the army, into the English army. While the Scottish people, on the other hand, most of them, I had the feeling that they were fighting for something they believed in. They were voluntarily standing up to beat back the English, and that was also something that I think was different between the two sides. That there was much more, the belief in self-ownership and the self-determination in the Scottish side, and their right to write their own destiny, as opposed to the English side, where I feel like people were forced into it. They don't explain this, but that's the feeling I get, at least from watching the interactions of these different characters.
Yeah,
and I agree. Yeah,
I appreciate that the movie gave us that scene. I thought it was interesting that they show it to us and recognize the evil that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that all the other people reacted to it with horror. Like, are you kidding me? You're dragging out these people to go fight in this King Edward guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then it, and I understand they don't want to totally muddy the waters with our hero being a hero. But I tend to believe that there was definitely some kind of, whether they thought it was an obligation or there was just straight out coercion
Mm-hmm.
for some of these lords to join him. I mean, I understand that they're being oppressed by a foreign power, and you can get volunteers quite easily in this situation. I mean, I think if the United States hadn't invaded Afghanistan, the Taliban wouldn't have had nearly as many recruits as they've only grown in size since the United States, because there's like an enemy to fight, and there's reasons to fight that enemy now. If we'd have stayed over here, it's like, well, why am I joining up? I got crops to farm. Yeah. So I could see there being more volunteers on Robert the Bruce's side, and I appreciate that they gave us that scene. But I understand it's an action movie. It's not like a historical documentary. They're not going to go into the details of everything. But it annoys me that the hero is a king.
Yeah.
And that he's royalty, and he's above everybody else and better than everybody else, and you got to bow and scrape to the guy. And it's just this idea that princes and royalty are better than regular people. I just hate that. I hate when Disney does it.
Yeah.
I hate it when historians do it. Mm-hmm. I just hate it when everybody does it. Modern day people, when they watch some prince marry some princess today, and a billion people watch it, who cares? Who cares? These people are just scum. Anyway.
Globalist scum.
Yeah.
Well, I have a few comments to make, if you guys don't mind. And both of you had really good moments there in your discussion. One comment I would like to make is regarding him claiming to be of the people and not the land. That sounded like political rhetoric to me, similar to how Bernie Sanders says he's of the people. Now, I would say that Robert the Bruce is probably a fair amount better than a Bernie Sanders type, because he wasn't advocating for one kind of deodorant and more outwardly socialist things. And we also have to remember the context of, this is like the 1300s. I mean, the Magna Carta had just been signed 100 years prior. This is going into what is considered the Dark Ages. The history of humanity has been sort of a long struggle towards being able to scrape above subsistence and then be able to worry about things like gaining more freedoms and having rights that are recognized by people, within a community. So I think for the context, Robert the Bruce is clearly presented as the hero in this. And one of the early moments is where the Scots had been fighting and then surrender to King Edward. The only one left remaining fighting is William Wallace after the Battle of Falkirk. And the demands, or sort of the treaty that's brought forth, is that these men the Scottish will no longer have to fight overseas land or overseas battles for King Edward. Mm-hmm. So the conscription would be more limited. But then, of course, he, as almost all politicians do, he goes back against that shortly thereafter. So kind of an interesting open to this, because I think that, like Robert, you were saying, there was resistance that was already happening. They were crushed a bit. And then when William Wallace finally was killed, it reinvigorated that spirit of defiance. And I think that's one of the things that, at least per the film, really brought Robert the Bruce off of the fence and into actually rising up against England. And even King Edward says to him, per the script, you had the courage to stand up to me. Now you need to have the wisdom to sit down. And he says this right after they destroy a castle that is already surrendered, but Edward refuses to accept the surrender. And the reason is given is that they have this like catapult thing that they light on fire.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we built this thing. We spent all these resources on it. If we don't use it, then it's totally wasted. So we got to use it. And that just reminded me of how, the military industrial complex in present day terms work, right? Like they're always building weapon systems based on the last war that they can't really use very effectively in the next war. And they just sit around. So they sort of, have to like come up with reasons to use them.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of Truman's excuses for why he dropped the bomb in World War II. He's like, well, we spent all this money. We're just going to not use it.
Right, which is like, it's not even like just evil. It's like hubris evil. It's like even worse, It's like, well, it's not because I'm totally evil, but it's because I'm not cheap.
And you can sit comfort from your own home while doing it, right? I mean, they don't have to ever be the ones doing it. The ones who are doing the killing, I mean, many of them are pretty psychologically damaged after that. So it's that's even more evil. They're the chicken hawks. They are, all for going and dropping these bombs, but they're never the ones doing it, and their families are never the ones doing it either. So it's that side of it that makes it extra like evil, that you can just sit from the comfort of your home or your computer and just watch these events unfold. It just costs
clicking your mouse and millions of people die, as opposed to back then when it was more like you had to get out in the field, you had to get dirty, you had to get bloody, you're cutting people's heads off with your sword in your face. It's a little bit different.
Right. And I will say that the kings and the lords actually being within the battles themselves is far better than just having a gang of 535 and a commander-in-chief just sending drones and people playing video games blowing up weddings.
At least you have some skin in the game. At least.
I mean, I just, you couldn't help notice, but in the movie itself, the way they portray King Robert, he is sort of supposed to be one of the people. I mean, he's down there digging the ditches, at the end where they make the trap, and he is always there marching, and he is always out there fighting. He is getting dirty and he's getting bloody, and he goes through a lot of suffering, which makes him more, a human being in the sense of an ordinary human being. And I feel that the viewers will inevitably have a more favorable view of this person, because someone watching this movie and have no perspective or anything, just seeing that, I mean, that is the reaction will be, oh, he's clearly one of them. He's down there and working with his hands. He's not just somebody sitting on his throne, shouting out commands through a bullhorn. And then I just, as a whole, obviously, the smaller political units are better than bigger political units. I wouldn't want to see anybody being the king, but it's impossible to not see, the difference and be more favorable towards the Scottish in this movie. And so just from putting it in perspective, like I'm not endorsing anybody being the king anywhere. But it is, from a point of view of radical secession and decentralization, this is the good side here, even though this is the better of the two sides.
Right, you're kind of given two terrible options, but one is clearly more terrible.
Yeah, and the English, they're bound to lose. If you see look on history, how empires, I mean, this is not, stretching yourself all over the world, but it's still stretching yourself out of the bounds of your native sort of land. And you see that at the end of the movie when they point this out. He says, they don't know the land. This is our land. We know it, and we're going to take advantage of it. So even if they're 50 times more people than we are, we'll beat them, because we'll make sure that they fall into the trap. They don't know the land. The Scottish are bound. They have a bond with their land. They know what they're doing there. They know where the ground sinks in and where to, all of that. The battle at the end sort of really gives that impression that, an empire that stretches itself out all over the world will come down. And that's what it did, because the natives of that land, they have a bond to it that you cannot underestimate. And you look at Vietnam, the quagmire they got stuck in there. I mean, that wasn't, what a disaster. They didn't know what they were dealing with there either.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note and to look as history unfolds when, say, the English rule over the Scottish. They don't just wipe out the entire political hierarchy structure. They go in and they take it over. They want to leave that infrastructure in place so that all the taxes and everything comes in and they can gain that. So I think it's really interesting to note that had Scotland lacked a hierarchy at all, like a political hierarchy of any kind, it was just people living on their own land and nobody paid fealty to anybody, whether this war would have even been necessary. It seems like they would have been completely ungovernable.
Yeah.
Like the resources required for England to come in and set up everything and, convince people that they were now ruled by somebody would have been way more hassle than it was worth.
Yeah.
And then to just come in, have a puppet now and then extract resources from this puppet when people were used to paying fealty to this puppet was way easier and way more economically advantageable.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. I mean, if you're just having a bunch of private people living on their own land and their property, and there's really nothing to take over, and you're going to then go in and convince all these people that now I rule over you and you ought to pay me. That is, that becomes not so easy, not an easy task. So no, that's correct.
Yeah, and I think this played right into the guerrilla tactics that Robert the Bruce implemented. And one of the reasons why they were so effective, because he would go in and take castle by castle with a small force and just destroy the castle and not give the English any reason to want to stay there and keep it.
Yeah, it reminds me of my own history, Swedish history, when many times there were battles with the Russians, but Russia was impossible to invade because it was so big. And so the Swedish army would march in and the Russians would just burn down that next destination. And there was nowhere to go. So they just froze to death, out there. And they could never be invaded. And this is, same kind of, not the same thing, but it's the same concept. And they stretch themselves out like this and they become vulnerable. So they just target these targets individually and take them over and burn them down. And it's a smart move. It's very interesting that to see that.
Right. This is like an early iteration of the scorched earth policy, right? Where you just don't leave them anything worth trying to capture.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, one other point I wanted to make regarding the unsettled truce with King Edward in Scotland right before the uprising with Robert the Bruce was that not only did he go back on the agreement to not do conscription, but they also levied increased taxes as war reparations. And that sounded very similar to the Versailles Treaty to me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my next point is, let's see. I thought that would bring something up. But
taxation is theft.
Taxation is theft. So Elizabeth, the new wife of Robert the Bruce, and this is like an arranged marriage that's supposed to solidify the political unity between the two countries, right? She becomes sympathetic to Robert's cause and really thinks that what he's doing is correct and noble and worth doing. And so she has a line that was reminiscent of an H.L. Mencken quote where, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but he says there comes a time when it's time to raise the black flag and start slitting throats. And it seemed to me like she got to that point where she was like, okay, the English are doing some really awful shit here. And clearly the Scottish people are on the receiving end of this and it's not right. And they should be able to resist this by whatever means necessary. And this is where that weasel, the Edward the Younger, who was a petulant child, who reminded me of Commodus from Gladiator, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's that's a good analogy.
And yeah, I mean, he was a real piece of shit, but he wanted to raise the dragon banner, which apparently was symbolic of we're not going to use the normal code of conduct in engaging in this war. We are going to offer no quarter, no mercy. We are going to kill men, women, and children. We're going to destroy everything. And it's kind of weird that they're going to wear that banner or raise that flag and basically make people aware that there is no negotiation here. There is no resistance. There's only violence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the scene where they agree to fight one-on-one, which seems logical, right? This is supposed to be a conflict between warlords, not a conflict between civilians. And then they stab them in the back and burn down the village there, which is, I mean, that was just he is clearly acting like he has no ethical code of conduct whatsoever, and it's completely immoral, just totally distorted in his way of acting, and it's just it's really awful. And then that was probably the most difficult thing to watch, when he's just betraying his own word, basically. And that wasn't the prince, but and it's not clear whether or not the prince had influence in making that command, but it seems like he did, because I'm not sure they got along very much, the general there and the prince. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I think his name was Valence. Maybe?
Yeah. He seems to think also that the prince is a little wimp, and so he wants to run the show himself and not take orders from some little kid. But he comes off as pretty evil himself. But that moment when we won't fight today because it's Sunday, but tomorrow, and then they go and stab them in the back and attack them from behind in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that was a chicken shit move for sure.
Yep.
And I still think that, at least presented in the film, that Valence had the advantage, even in a one-on-one combat. But he also knew that he had a greater advantage in that he had a larger force already present. He had reinforcements on the way.
Mm-hmm. And
now he was buying time to be able to basically do a sneak attack on their encampment and attack women and children. Yeah,
no, it was pretty awful. And getting back to Robert's wife, who she has some she shows loyalty, right? I mean, she's not looking out for herself anymore. She's starting to believe in this cause when they try to force her to sign the annulment of the marriage, and then they said, well, soon he will be dead anyway. Well, why do I have to sign anything if he's going to be dead anyway? That's a good question.
It's all optics at that point, right?
Yep, and it's he's then that's where she gets this feeling that, okay, well, he's obviously causing trouble for the king here and causing trouble for the entire army, and he's not going anywhere. So I'm not going to sign this, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble myself for it. But I think I liked her character. I thought she was she tries, she's on the right side, and the way they made her character, I feel they did a good job.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Now, I do have a point when they finally do capture and kill William Wallace, that they mention that Wallace was not a man, but a destructive and dangerous idea. And I recall many quotes. Some are Mises, some are Rothbard, some are Ron Paul. But basically, there's no way to defeat an idea whose time has come.
Yeah.
And the Mises quote I have here is that, quote, violent resistance against the power of the state is the last resort of the minority in its effort to break loose from the oppression of the majority. The minority that desires to see its ideas triumph must strive by intellectual means to become the majority. And I know that Robert the Bruce isn't, going the intellectual route with this. He's going guerrilla tactics, but he did have sort of the higher moral ground.
Yeah, he did, and I think that's what made it easier for him to get people behind him too, because he could just be that person. He there's pretty clear that you have this one guy who is going to violently expropriate you a lot more than I will do. And so he uses this phrase too. He says, no more taxes for King Edward. Well, I might tax you too, but no more taxes for this dude, at least, to whom you have no relation and you will never see, and who lives far away from your backyard. And I think that sort of it plays a little bit on this localist idea that people are more okay to some extent to be expropriated, as long as they can sort of have more control and see what's happening, or have at least the delusion that they have some control and see what's happening, where their funds are funneled into what types of projects. They feel like they have more a power to that. So he did have an easier time because of this. He had the moral high ground for sure, and then you can clearly see that.
Right.
Well, he
you
also-
almost sound like Walter Block for a moment with the baddie A versus baddie B. But I always consider them, campaign promises, and those are equivalent to lies.
Yeah.
But, go ahead, Robert.
Well, he also had the advantage of not having a rival, having murdered the guy in a church when he had gone there to treat with him in good faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because how it's presented in the film, I almost wonder if it was a little self-defense-y, because he does present him an option, and then Common, I think that's his name, he's like, nah, I'm going to turn you in, and you're going to get murdered. So basically his weapon is, King Edward.
Yeah.
So it seemed like a bit of a self-defense move at that point to me.
Maybe he felt, obviously he feels threatened at some level, maybe even scared that he feels like he has to do it. But also he doesn't, even if that's not it, then he doesn't want to let this opportunity go, because he feels like his rival has a lot of influence over the people that surrounds him. And he wants that, he knows that in order to come out victorious here, he's going to need more help than what he has from his own group. So he needs that backing, that alliance, and he's not getting that there in any collaboration. But yes, I mean, he could easily make the argument that he's scared and threatened, and just doesn't see any other way out of it than stabbing him to death.
Right, Robert, do you condemn him for this, or do you think that perhaps there's a bit of a self-defense element to it?
It smelled to me, when I watched it, I completely was like, oh, so he doesn't want to be a part of his rebellion. Well, I need him to not oppose me, and I might even be able to grab some of the guys that were supporting him once I murder this guy. It seemed like a complete, I need to not be opposed in order to have a chance to win against Edward. So I'm just going to murder this guy and move forward. It seemed to me like he was just a guy who didn't mind getting his hands dirty to achieve his political goals. And that sounds to me like, well, any politician ever. But
yeah.
He does have some positive traits. I will agree with Olaf on that, and yourself, Daniel. He's definitely the least kingly person that we see in modern cinema and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say that he was a morally pure character by any means.
No, definitely not. And even in his exchange with Douglas, which was like a bit of a disclosure to each other when they meet on the road, he says, "I'm trying to be a good man," and Douglas says, "Well, that's good enough for me."
Yeah.
And I kind of like that, but I also it reminded me of the Larkin Rose video of if you were king. So even if you were benevolent, you would still not be able to do the moral thing, because as king, you would need to levy taxes to pay for your kingdom and pay, and have guards and all of these things. It's a good video, and I'll post it on the show notes page, which will be at lastnighters.com/50, by the way.
Right. And also as king, you can't just give suggestions to things. You would have to actually enforce your decrees, and therefore, you're end up attacking and killing people in order to be a king. So yeah, that's a great video. Everybody should check it out.
Right. So I will post that. Now, I did mention the raising the dragon banner earlier, and I wonder if this might be a good discussion point for a few minutes. They say they're dealing with outlaws. They have no rights. So what does that mean? I mean, in the context of the time, what did rights mean, and what did saying they didn't have rights mean? Are they saying that they're not human? Are they dehumanizing them? Are they treating them as NPCs or Russian bots? What's going on here?
I think that meant that they had no rights under British law, like under English law that applied to all subjects of English law. That's what I interpreted it as. So they are voluntarily foregoing any kind of protection that the crown would have otherwise offered, or, not necessarily protection, but also, due process or that sort of thing. It's like these people have voluntarily extricated themselves from the kingdom. Therefore, they are not going to be subject to any kind of kingdom's benefits. So we can just go ahead and slaughter them. They are enemy combatants, that sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. That's how I took it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that that's sort of how I envision the viewing the Scots. But it's they have to say things like this in order for them to maintain the the geographical territory over which they have the monopoly on violence. Because if they say, these people have the right, they could easily have said, okay, you don't have any rights under the English law, but hey, we recognize your own independence. Please go. That they could have said that too, and make your own society, but they're not allowing them to go. So it's this weird relationship where you don't have any rights under the English crown, but at the same time you're forced to stay under the English crown, or else we'll murder you. So it could easily be, okay, you don't have any rights under the English crown. You can say that, but you have the right to separate yourself and create your own voluntary political association. But apparently they didn't allow that either. So it's this win, and it's a lose-lose situation. So and they had this is you can see this in political rhetoric all the time. I mean, imagine a state wanting to secede from the U.S. There's never a problem adding states, never a problem adding more territory over which you have a monopoly over coercive taxation. But letting a piece go, that can't happen.
Right, so, it's almost like breaking the mental control. It's like, wait a minute, you can just do that?
Yeah.
You can just leave if you want to? We can't allow you to do that. I mean, it's like when Lincoln fought the Civil War because he was like, no, you ain't leaving.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's so the thing that they do there, which is just so really evil, is that they maintain that rhetoric that you don't have any rights under the crown, but you also don't have any right to leave the crown. So the only right you have is to stay and get hacked up into pieces. That's the only way out of this for you, basically. Which is, which I mean, if that's the position of the group of people who are currently in power, or at least have appointed themselves to be in power, then I mean, it makes it even more difficult to not have the sympathy for the Scottish rebellion. Because, well, are they in rebellion really? Did they leave, or were they rebelling? Did they declare their own independence, or were they rebelling? These are two different things. And that also can relate to the Civil War. I mean, had the South seceded, or were they in rebellion? To me, they had already seceded. They weren't rebelling. They had already left. So, but it seems like, you didn't have the right to do that. But how then? I don't have, you don't have the rights of due process under the crown, but neither you have the right to leave the crown. So you can't win that game if those are the rules,
Yeah, apparently they had the right in 1776, but not in 1863 or whenever it was, 1860, right. 1861.
Exactly.
You have to really reframe the argument, because you can't point that out. Because then otherwise, like Jefferson Davis would have been like, well, wait a minute. Was George Washington wrong too?
Yeah. I mean, it's I think this comes down to, the favor of smaller, the favor of smaller political units as opposed to bigger political units. Smaller political units always tends to be less oppressive than bigger ones. I'm not saying that they are moral. I'm saying that they are better than the bigger ones. And so is a king to a democratic republic. A king is better than a democratic republic. And this is the argument that Hoppe outlines in his work, which is pretty, I think, very compelling and very, very good. And he makes a very, very strong case for it. So, and then from there, it's that the smaller kingdom is better than a bigger kingdom, because it's always easier it's less likely to indulge in these types of conflicts, because it's very expensive to do so. And I think that's
discussing Hans-Hermann Hoppe's Democracy.
Yes, you're
He's digitizing big time.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with your stuff, Daniel, but it's all jacked.
I am talking about that book, where Hoppe goes on and he, makes this comparison between a monarchy and a democracy, and ultimately a natural order, which would be a state of anarchy, so to speak, like the private property anarchy. And it's so convincing the way he puts it, the way a king relates to to his people, as opposed to how a democratic republican government with a group of temporary caretakers, how they treat their people and how they engage being, not the owner of this estate, which is the government.
Right.
That a king is, and that makes a huge difference. It's the private ownership of that estate that, and everything is deduced from that. The types of behavior that a king might engage in versus the U.S. president or Congress, or these guys who are sitting there are only temporary caretakers who tend to be more engaged in more extortion and expropriation, and are not concerned with the future value of such an estate the way a king would be concerned of this future value.
Right, because a long-term ruler would have an entire lifetime to worry about.
Yes.
And not only that, but his lineage, his children,
Yes.
his grandchildren, he's got to see that to them.
Mhm.
Whereas a politician who's only in there for 4 years, gets in, gets out, gets what he can.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And the way people look at the prince and the king versus the way people look at sort of a democratically government is very different too. I mean, they make no mistake when that king and that prince make a move or something. They will look at that move with the most utter suspicion. They are not deceiving themselves in believing that they are free. They know that that person has power over them. So they will look at that person with suspicion all the time.
Right. It's not like they can live on this idea that government is of the people, like in a democracy.
Right.
In a dictatorship or a monarchy, no, we know it's you. We know it's you, that king guy. You're the one that made that decision, not us.
Yeah. And if you keep going in this direction, I will create an uproar and we'll overthrow you, and that's going to be it. So he's not going to engage in these like violent acts of expropriation the way when you have free entry into government and everybody can take part of it, and then you have different interest group competing for resources in it. That is, I mean, you kind of have to read it for yourself, but it is a very, very convincing book for that case, of a monarchy, a true monarchy, versus not just what you see now of a reigning monarchy. Let's say Sweden. I mean, these people. The king has no power, doesn't do anything. He's just sitting there. But, a true monarchy when the king is actually the ruler, and how that would play out in the real world today. I mean, it makes a very good, he makes a very good case. And I encourage anybody who hasn't read the book. I can't believe there's anybody who wouldn't have read the book, but if there is anybody in the audience that hasn't, then I would, it's probably no book that I would recommend more than that.
Yeah, the histories of monarchies throughout history is really quite interesting. And usually, especially the more successful ones, I want to think of mostly the Japanese and the Egyptians and probably some others. But you always see monarchies being tightly integrated with the church or some sort of religion. So that they usually claim that they are touched by God or descended from God. They have some sort of divine, lineage, and that's why they have the right to rule you. They have to come up with this kind of BS line in order to subject, all these people to their rule. Otherwise, why do you have the right to rule me and tell me what to do? Oh, well, I'm the son of God. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not. So, okay, I guess I'll do what you say.
The divine monarchies of Europe. Yeah, no, that's true. And I guess that's partially the strong religious faith that's not present in the same way today as it was before among the people, also kept that system in some sort of balance, because it was always this divine respect for the king, right? I mean, it was chosen by godly means, even though it often passed down through the family and the lineage that was decided who would be the king, but still,
right.
Yeah,
you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that, a whole lot of things before I got kicked off and then got back on. And by the way, we've never had this level. Well, I don't want to say never.
We've had technical difficulties, but we've never had you dropping all the time.
Yeah, I'm getting like power surges where everything's like shutting down and then reconnecting after a few moments. So it's quite bizarre. But to some of the points that you guys have been making, Democracy of the God That Failed is an excellent book, and I will post a link to it, not only to the Amazon page where you can buy it and we will earn a small commission, also a free version that's available at Mises.org. So that'll be on the show notes page. But as Olaf was saying, I'm sure that it's not advocating for, coercion and violence. It's basically comparing two systems, one that is revered and one that is often derided, and comparing them on various economic incentive and other elements, and basically stating that one tends to be worse than the other. And that's basically what the analysis is, and it is quite good. The other thing that you guys were talking about was the relationship with rulership or the government or the state and religion. And in many times they were one and the same or symbiotic, developing in concert with each other, supporting each other, airing legitimacy upon the other. And we see that as an example when Robert the Bruce goes to the bishops and says, "Hey, I want to be crowned the king." Mm-hmm. They're like, "Well, we need legitimacy right now. So we're going to absolve you of the murder. And basically in exchange, you give us legitimacy and we'll make you the king." And that reminds me of, there's a great lecture on the Miracle of Europe by Ralph Raico, and I'll post that in the show notes as well, where he basically says that in the middle or the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, which really weren't so dark, that there was a bit of a separation between individual states and the rulerships there and the churches, which were more cross borders. And so in that sort of adversarial tension between the two, that these vacuums or little pockets of freedom would develop. And that's where commerce and the merchant class began to emerge. It's where you see the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, the market economy sort of being able to take root. Mm-hmm. And it's not that, either one of those were, the religious class or the state class were necessarily advocating for anything positive here, but it was because they were in a combative relationship with each other that things slipped through, and that's where the pockets of freedom kind of came from.
Yeah, that's true, and that's where also you see forms of private law emerging from these merchant places. The merchant law, I mean, that didn't arise from somebody just writing in a book or giving out a command. That arose naturally and spontaneously, which is also some very a good sort of real world example where you have natural law arise and conflict resolution can be done peacefully and without this entity that tends to always claim to be ruling over us.
Right. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that Tom Woods, he has a product called Liberty Classroom. And if you get the master level membership, he also includes the courses that he did for the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. And his course on government actually gets into the origin of rights, mm-hmm. where they came from, how they developed, what they meant in this kind of time period. And you get that included at the master level membership. And right around Christmas or shortly thereafter, he will have his second lowest prices of the year. The best prices are at Black Friday. Right after Christmas, when grandma sends you like $5 in a card, you can use some of that money and buy it on our link, and we'll give you a free Read It for.me membership as well, and our eternal thanks. But if you get that, then it's super interesting, and we'll give you a new perspective on governments and how rights came to be. So that's my 30-second advertisement in the middle of our show here.
That was great. I like it.
Nicely done.
So we do need to wind down in probably another 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll get into our final summaries and reviews. But I know you both took notes. So is there anything that you want to cover before we get into the wind down phase on the final stretch here?
I'm trying to think of something. I have notes here, but it seems like I covered most of the stuff. It's just one thing that I think is, and I feel like I've pointed out again because I think it's very, very important. It's the way this kingdom, or I really will call it an empire, even though it's not really an empire in the narrative in the movie, because it's really spanning not a big geographical territory. But it's still significant that when they overextend themselves, they become vulnerable. And I find that to be a beautiful element of the plot, because that is very true. Always have been with empires. When they tend to overextend themselves, to become vulnerable, and they fail. And they become vulnerable on different in different ends, both economically, and they have to keep taxing more and expropriate more. But they also become vulnerable strategically and are very much target of these type of guerrilla attacks that Robert the Bruce engage in. And they become vulnerable because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know the land, the foreign land that they are, now wanting to rule over and command over. And so they're bound to fail, and that is exactly what happens. So I thought it was beautifully done when at the end of the movie, or not the end, but it is getting to an end. They said that they have more people and everything, but they don't know our land. And I think that is a very strong statement, because it's the natives always have a bond to this land where they grow, and they know everything about it. They know the secrets, they know the traps, they know where you go to do certain things and activities. They know the areas that you should avoid because it's dangerous and so forth. And other outsiders, they don't know this. And it makes that particular point that is reiterated in the movie, I think is nicely done. That they come down, the empire comes down at the end. They always do.
Yeah, just to piggyback on top of that, anytime you have like one culture controlling and dominating another culture, the home culture is seen as this would be seen as like an invasion, right? Like the Scottish very much felt that they had their own culture, and the English were a different invading culture. Yeah. They were being controlled by this like foreign other. And that's the price of empire is blowback and terrorism and insurgency. You are going to subjugate foreign people. They're not going to see you as of themselves. They're going to rebel, and they're going to reject that rule. Because they're not only stealing from you, but they're also doing it in an English way, in a foreign way. They're kind of forcing their own culture on you, and you see this today all over the place. People reject, being forced to change in ways that are alien to them. They reject it, and they will fight back violently.
Yeah, I think that's it's happening pretty much in a lot of European countries right now. You have clashes between groups, ethnic and cultural groups, and they are they're becoming violent, and it's manifesting itself, and it's getting nasty, and that, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would like to piggyback as well and say that a lot of the guerrilla tactics that were employed, and they even fall for the Trojan horse situation here, but in the means of going around castle to castle and traveling in stealth, striking without warning, and doing that scorched earth policy, this is, I think, in response to Valence going back on his word of challenging him one-on-one. And so it's giving them back like a dose of their own medicine.
Yeah.
And one point that I thought was really interesting, and this will actually be a callback to some of the pre-show content that we've had with Olaf, is that once these guys are Trojan horsed into one of the castles, the people within the castle are like, arm yourselves, quickly, arm yourselves. And that just, reminded me of like, yeah, you want to be in a position to be able to have the capacity for self-defense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a tragedy. I mean, that's, that recently one of the presidents just passed, right? I think something that they have been missing when they talk about this guy is that he signed the gun zone free acts that would make all these spaces very vulnerable to these types of attacks. I don't think anybody mentioned that he signed that thing into law. It was just horrible. I mean, look at the consequence of such an act.
Right, and we actually even see it in the movie where, is it Douglas who goes back to his home castle and he slaughters the English in the church because they left their weapons outside?
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, and they just kill everybody in there. Reminds me of certain attacks, and not so far past, in these churches that have occurred.
Right. And I want to say one more thing. This is the first movie I've ever actually seen where they literally throw down the gauntlet. And so it actually makes more sense like that saying now.
Yeah. No, I don't think I've seen it either. That's true. Yep. No, that's a good note.
All right. So, Robert, I do have a question for you.
Oh, yes.
So at the end, when they have defeated Valence and Edward II in battle, and Edward II is all alone, surrounded by the Scots. Why? Well, two questions really rolled into one here. Because Edward II is fighting Robert the Bruce, but the Scots are celebrating. They're standing around celebrating while their king is potentially about to get killed. And then they just let him go. So I'm sure that isn't what happened in real life, but it just seems really bizarre to me that they would end the movie in that kind of fashion where you're like, that's the guy, kill him. And, you've sort of solved like most of your problem here.
Well, but would you have? Like, you let him live and he's a defeated opponent who knows you and knows he knows you can probably deal with him and knows you're not going to back down from a fight.
Oh, that's
if you kill him, then his next brother is going to have to avenge him. There's a fair amount of, I think, a little bit of dealing going on there that for reasoning why they just let him go. Because, yeah, they did have him at his mercy. They could have easily killed him at any point. Would it have been better to kill him? Probably. I think they probably did the right thing. Now, one thing that's interesting about that battle is I appreciate that either the moviegoer, the movie makers, or Robert the Bruce, if this is true, proved Sun Tzu correct yet again for like the millionth time. One of the lessons that he teaches in The Art of War is to always decide where the fight's going to take place. And Robert the Bruce definitely set it up. He knew he was outnumbered. He was outgunned. He didn't, he had to come up with a way to beat all the heavy mounted cavalry that Edward would have. And so he chose the place. He had this mired and muck, and he knew that those horses weren't going to be able to just run his men down in this swamp. And so, yeah, it's pretty good stuff. I appreciate that. You can really turn the tide of a fight depending on, deciding where the fight's going to take place, but also with the harrying tactics of that they exemplified throughout the entire movie. That was also very strategically well done. If you're an outnumbered force, you're not just going to show up to a field and fight this overwhelming force and then just see who wins based on pure numbers. That would have been stupid. But in terms of strategy, I think they probably did the right thing, but who can say?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good answer because if they had killed him, then you're right. They would have potentially had repercussions related to, vengeance and other things. Whereas if you have a humiliated opponent who knows that you can handle him, like it's a bully, you smack him back in the nose, he's going to stop fucking with you.
Yeah,
for the most part.
It's like you said, it's more humiliating for the guy to he's humiliated for life. So he's not going to go at you again. I mean, he didn't seem that clever, but hopefully he won't go at you again.
All right, one more question for you, Robert, and then we can get into final summary and review time.
Okay.
Why are the subtitles so small in this movie?
It's not my job to make the subtitles for Netflix. I don't know. Usually Netflix is pretty good. Were they really small on your screen?
Well, not the, like you turn on the words to see the closed captioning, but I mean like where they say, they give you the setting and the place. It was tiny little words. We're watching it on an iPad, and maybe if we watched it on a TV, but with the distance and all that, it seemed extremely small and also rather quick to be able to read all of the words on the screen before they would move them along. So that's just my 2 cents back to the producers. You spent $120 million on this thing. Give me some bigger words.
That sounds like an old man complaint. And get off my lawn. Crazy yelling kids.
That's right. All right. So we're at that point where we do have final summaries and reviews. So, Robert, if you'd like to begin, set an example for our Anarcho-Viking Olof here, and then he can take the mic and give his number 1 to 10, 1 decimal point deep, and then I will do the same at the end, and then we'll wind it down.
Certainly. So, old Captain Kirk, Chris Pine, does a pretty decent job pretending to be a Scottish guy. The movie itself follows a fairly decent narrative. It doesn't have too many lulls and dead spots. It sets up its protagonist and its antagonist fairly well. It's a decent story that you can get behind, although for me, you always know it's just going to end badly. I mean, even if Robert the Bruce wins and he becomes the king, and yeah, it's preferable to a democracy, but it's still this political structure that violently dominates the people living in that geographic area. It's not like it's a super happy story, but from a layman's perspective, watching just some average movie trying to get some entertainment value, you can pretty much get behind his struggle. I mean, everybody can recognize a struggle for freedom, even though it's, as misguided as it would end up being. It's not like Robert the Bruce was like, we got freedom. Okay, now nobody follow me or do anything I say and don't pay me any taxes because that would be immoral. and don't elect anybody else. No one ever does that in these movies because no one ever does it in real life. The only one who probably would have done it would be like Ron Paul, but even that I'm not even sure once he was there. I think maybe Larkin Rose would. I would, but if you're a very principled person, but these people are never principled. They're more pragmatic, living in the world that they live in, and I don't even know how realistic it would have been back in the day without how these ideas of freedom would have been able to spread without the internet and that sort of thing. I don't know. I really don't know. But anyway, the movie itself is worth a watch. It's on Netflix, so if you got that, it's just flip it on. It's a good 2 hours or so, I want to say. And for my rating, it's a positive one, but it didn't blow my doors off. I don't think it's up to the level of like a Braveheart, but it is strong. I'm going to give it a 7.1 for the RJ scale, and that's my final rating. Thank you. Recommended.
All right, Olaf, take it away.
Okay, well, I'm first going to say that I do recommend it, so I get that out of the way. I think it's a good movie because there are good teaching elements in the movie. I think one of the good things about the movie is that it's pro-decentralization. It's pro-secession in a way, if you really think about it. And a lot of people can relate. And then, it can start up conversation that way. It is also shows the irrationality of the empire as a ruling model, that it's unsustainable and it will come apart, which I think is good. I think it shows that people are more concerned with what happens in their backyard than they are with what happens in some place far away that they don't recognize. It shows that people are, they care about the neighborhood, they care about their own tribe, their community, their land, and I think people, a lot of people can have sympathy for the fight that he's fighting against a more bigger oppressive power. So yes, it is a good movie that will emphasize certain important libertarian elements, such as nullification and the secession and self-determination. And I think that's positive. Now, I don't think anybody will come out and make an anarcho-capitalist movie, for coming out of these outlets. So it's fair to have some perspective, and I'll give it positive. I will go even slightly higher, and I will go to 7.5 actually, because I think what brings it a little bit down, I could give it higher, but I think what brings it a little bit down is that it's easy to anticipate what's going to happen and how it's going to end. I think it's not that hard to foresee the series of events taking place once you have come in maybe 20, 30 minutes into the movie.
All right. Well, thank you for that summary and review and score. I will give mine, and I also will be positive on this thing. Where it was beautifully shot, I will agree with that, and I think that's where a lot of the money went. I also think a lot of the money went to Chris Pine, and he did a very fine job in his first role, not necessarily in space that I'm aware of. Well, he was Jack Ryan in one of them, right? But he's a half-decent guy, and I think he pulled off the Scottish angle pretty well. The lessons to be drawn from this and the discussion that resulted, I think, was quite good, and it just wants to have me reiterate the Hans-Hermann Hoppe angle of the monarchy versus democracy and just the comparison between the two. So I can't recommend that book enough. Democracy, the God That Failed. This movie was well done. I'm very impressed that Netflix was able to throw this much money at something like this, even though they're losing money hand over fist. The other thing that I would mention is that it seemed to be about twice as long as it was. Like when my wife and I were watching this, we were about an hour in and we're like, this isn't over yet. So it did cover a lot of historical material. It's, based on true events, et cetera, et cetera. But, how much of a record can we truly have from 1300 years ago, or from the year 1300 or 1306, whenever it took place? But it tried to pack a lot in. And so it was a little bit slow in plotting for me. So while positive, I'm going to go with a 6.5 on it. I do recommend watching it, and this is available on Netflix. So if you guys have that, it's included in the buffet style smorgasbord that capitalism provides you in that service. So do check it out. Now, next week, as we get closer and closer to Christmas time, I think we're going to do a Christmas movie, and it will be Will Ferrell's Elf coming at you from The Last Nighters, which, by the way, is part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. So check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. So, Robert, are you excited about Elf next week?
Not really. I don't know. I don't remember that movie. I mean, what is it? His dad is the executive of a publishing company, and Peter Dinklage is in it, and he's the Santa Claus is real. I don't know. It'll be fun, probably, but I don't remember any kind of like real economic stuff going on. Who knows? We'll see.
Oh, we're gonna tear that one apart. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be so much fun, and there are actually a lot of lessons on it. So I'm looking forward to that. So before we wind down, Olaf, thank you so much for being our guest here. And do you have any particular websites or anything you want to throw out to everyone where they can find your work or follow you in any way?
No, but I do hope that I can, contribute some more stuff. I don't have my own website yet. I never really started one. I've written some content for Actual Anarchy and about Hans Hoppe and his work and some other stuff. So I would direct people to that. And I'm on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. It's just wasting half of my time, I guess, being on Facebook. So you can find me there. And but yeah, no, that's it. I would point them to things that I've done for the Actual Anarchy project.
All right, that sounds great. We will post that in the show notes down below on lastnighters.com/50. Thank you, audience, so much for sticking with us for this episode. It has been a lot of fun, and we do appreciate your support. If you want to support us monetarily, not only with your listenership and reviews and subscribing to us on YouTube, giving us iTunes positive reviews, etc., you can support us at Patreon at lastnighters.com/Patreon. And we'll be back next week covering a Christmas film, Elf, with Will Ferrell. So thank you guys very much for coming on, and I'll say goodnight from last night. All right, we can continue for a few more minutes on the Actual Anarchy podcast before we get into the last, we just did the Last Nighters portion of the show. I'm backwards tonight. We're going to get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive in a moment. But we had some pre-show that I thought there was some content there that was really good. And it was sort of our guest Olaf talking about his migration, which wasn't necessarily him voting with his feet for more freedom. But I think that might be an interesting discussion for a few minutes with the Actual Anarchy audience who don't support us on Patreon to get a little bit of a flavor of that. Because Olaf, you told us that you started off in Sweden and then you've moved around a bit. And now you're finally in a place where there is actual freedom. Was additional freedom a motivating factor to you in making these decisions, or were they purely like opportunity, economic, occupational opportunities and things like that?
Yeah, freedom always motivated me. I mean, that's why I wanted to be independent in the first place. But I hadn't, I was not mature enough to map out where there was enough freedom, and so that didn't really draw me. There were certain cultural aspects that brought me to, let's say, Italy, because I was interested in the Renaissance history and learning the language and all of that. Then it never occurred to me really at that time that going to the United States. But when I did that, I had no real clue of sort of where the division between the states and which ones were more free, because I was not. And also I was pretty much on the left. I had socialist sympathies, and some libertarian instincts have always been there, but they were never on my radar screen. So it was never an ideology that was fed to me at any time. So that was sort of just by independent reading and thinking that I came to my own conclusions after many, many, many years, defying everything that they had taught to me and my upbringing in state-run schools in Sweden.
Right. Now, in the pre-show, you mentioned that you came to the U.S. About 10 years ago, and part of that you were in Italy. And if I just look at my handy-dandy calendar in front of me here, that pins you moving to Italy in roughly 2000 and moving to the U.S. in roughly 2004. That was the George W. Bush years. And from what I recall, shortly after 9/11, there was a huge worldwide sympathy for the U.S., but then that got defiled very quickly soon after. And then the U.S. was reviled due to the leadership here. Sure. And so I'm just wondering what the perspective was, if you can recall, being in Europe at the time, both right after 9/11 and then after the Iraq War II in 2003 and subsequent missteps by the Bush government. That we were told that the world was laughing at us and that it was embarrassing as an American to be traveling abroad, right? Like there were people talking about putting Canadian flags on their backpacks so that they wouldn't be confused as Americans.
I don't know if it was so bad, but I came to the US in 2008 and I was in Italy between 2004 and 2008. So I came just before the election of Barack Obama, right? So I only then, a few years later, discovered that there was this whole Ron Paul phenomenon going on. And I had no idea about it because, I was living in New York City, in Harlem, and everything was overshadowed by Barack Obama, and his candidacy and eventually winning the presidency. I didn't even remember even hearing about the name Ron Paul until the next election. But no, I don't think that there was, after this might have been in 2006, 2007, it started. And there was this, people started to ridiculing America for what they were doing in the Middle East. But, there was a lot of support for America coming from the European countries right after 9/11. So it's not like they weren't backed anything. I remember Swedish media, many of them endorsed some the actions of going after people in the Middle East after the towers fell. So that didn't happen until much later. They weren't laughing. There was a lot of sympathy for the U.S. after that attack, and it took many years for I think, because it was built up. The people started to get behind these military efforts by the U.S. government and their army to go into Iraq. It wasn't everybody was against it. There was a lot of people were for it. A lot of media outlets were for it in Europe, and there were also some maybe that were against it, but it wasn't just black and white. It was pretty mixed, I think. And it wasn't until later, like 2007, 2008, when it became sort of fashionable to laugh at Americans. But I never. They seemed like perfectly fine people to me. I just never found any faults in them that I couldn't see in my own in people who living around me every day there. So but it was interesting.
All right. Well, any questions, Robert, before we wind down the actual Anarchy portion show and get into some Kathleen Turner overdrive for a few minutes?
Oh, well, I think I can save my stuff for the KTO. I kind of want to get a little less formal and bring up some other stuff. So let's just wrap this bad boy up like a nice big fat Christmas present.
All right. Well, this is a Christmas present at your feet, our audience, and a little bit of a teaser from Mr. Johnson regarding what might lie behind that paywall in the old Patreon bonus content that we affectionately called Kathleen Turner Overdrive. So you can get that access at actualanarchy.com/Patreon. The show notes and more for this episode can be found at actualanarchy.com/107. I want to thank Olof the Anarcho-Viking, who is a writer for the site, and we will have a link to all of the articles that he has written over the years. And I think he mentioned he might try to write some more stuff for us in the near future. So I do look forward to that. And Olof, thank you so much for being a guest, and let's get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, peace out.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.